Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retro Game Core. So the Anbernic RG552 has been around for I think 2 or 3 months at this point. And I've only really done one comprehensive video about this device. And that video, despite being almost an hour long, was what I called a preliminary review. And that was because at the time I didn't feel like the firmware matched the potential of the hardware and the screen of this device. Well, I'm happy to report that we now have several custom firmware options available for this device, and that's what we're going to tackle in this video today. To start, we're going to update the Android firmware on this device to bring it up to Android 9, and also unlock a ton of new features and better performance too. Next, we'll talk about 2 different Linux-based operating systems that we can access on this device too via dual boot. The first of those is AmberELEC. Now this is the new name for 351ELEC. Now that their operating system has expanded to other devices besides the 351 devices, they decided to do a bit of a name change too. And they're right on the cusp of releasing a new version of their firmware, and this really is just going to be a sneak preview of things to come. And finally, we're going to take a look at a new operating system called JELOS, and that stands for Just Enough Linux Operating System. This one here was created by the original developer behind 351ELEC, and so we'll also show off some of the features in this one too. At the end of the day, my goal here in this video is to show you how much improvement we're going to be able to squeeze out of this device thanks to the hard work of community developers. Now, whether or not these incredible improvements are going to make this device worth the ridiculous $227 retail price, well, that's going to be up to you. Either way, I'm excited to show off some of these new features, and so without any further delay, let's jump into it. Okay, first thing I want to do is show off a little bit of each of these firmwares. We're going to start with Android because this one seems to be the most fundamental change. We're going to use a custom Android build made by Black Seraph, which includes an upgrade to a super clean version of Android 9 that has optional access to Google Play Store. The developers also implemented an overclock as well as customized fan settings to improve performance. And there are a lot of nice user-focused features as well. For example, you can swap out the buttons between Xbox and Nintendo layouts on the fly, and it also has support for 5 GHz Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, either through an external dongle, or you can even add the chip yourself internally. And it also now supports an exFAT file system, which is going to make it compatible with operating systems like AmberELEC. So now let's talk about that one. Like I said, AmberELEC was previously known as 351ELEC, but the fundamental operating system remains the same. They focus on the user experience, everything is pre-configured and ready to go. In this particular release, they focused on new emulators and themes, and they've also implemented support for 5 GHz Wi-Fi as well as different fan profiles. And finally, like I mentioned in the intro, JELOS is a leaner version of 351ELEC sources. The focus on this operating system is more about getting out of the way so that you can just focus directly on the games. But it does have some of those features that are found in the Android side as well, like overclocking and new cooling profiles. On top of that, this one also supports 5 GHz Wi-Fi, and they've also increased the security posture on the firmware as well so that nobody's going to be tapping inside your device. Okay, now to install Android, you do need to be a member of Black Seraph's Patreon page. You don't need to be a paying member for many months, but at least 1 month in order to get access to the files. And so you'll have to make a decision of whether or not that upgrade is going to be worth it to you. Either way, once you've signed up like I have here, you'll be able to find the RG552 files within their profile. And so then just grab the latest files from their website. There's going to be multiple ones, just grab them all. And once you have them all downloaded, they'll look like this. What you want to do is use 7-zip to go and extract the ones that are labeled 001. So that's going to be the first one on this list, and then the 4th one down. And once you have all those extracted, you can actually go ahead and get rid of all those zip files. You're not going to need them anymore. And so within here, there's going to be a README file, and I recommend following these instructions. We're going to do it here in this video, but it's always better to do the written guide in case there's been an update. So first thing we want to do is install the drivers so that our PC is going to recognize the 552. So go into the folder called driver, and then you'll find a driver install exe file. All you have to do is open this up and then select install driver. It's going to ask, do you really want to do this? And you say, yeah, man, I want to do it. After that, you're good to go. You likely will not need to reboot your computer. So let's test it out. We're going to plug in our computer into the leftmost of the USB-C ports on the 552. Then we're going to hold down the volume up button, the F button or the function button, and then press the power button. The fan is going to kick on for a second. As soon as the fan turns on, you can let go of the buttons. On the PC, you should probably hear that chime of when a USB device is connected, and you can go into the device manager and make sure that a ROC USB device is showing up here. If it isn't, then I would reboot your PC and try again. So once we're all set up, we need to run the install.bat file. And then you just want to agree to start the app up. And so now it's going to run through a script which is going to install certain things onto the RG552. You're going to get a bunch of pop-ups asking you, do you really want to do this? And you just keep hitting, yeah, man, I want to do it. There's probably about 10 times you have to do that altogether. It does get a little bit annoying, but it is pretty easy. Now, once that's done, the device is going to power on, and then it's going to erase the internal storage. And this is going to take maybe another 5 minutes, but after that, it's actually going to boot right into Android, as you can see here. Now, you could be ready to go if you want to go right now. But if you want to have the Google Play Store, we need to add that next. And so back on the Patreon page, there's a link to get the latest Open Gaps bundle that'll work with this device. I'll also have a link to this one in the written guide, which you'll find in my video description too. Anyway, you want to go to the Open Gaps website, get the ARM64 9.0 Pico version here. And that's it. You just go ahead and download this file here. It's going to be something like 200 megs altogether. And here it is. You can see it on the bottom here, Open Gaps ARM64 9.0 Pico. Now we need to get this file onto the device, so we're going to plug the device back into our computer, and then swipe down from the top and select the USB settings here, and then just turn on Use USB for file transfer. Back on your PC, you should get some sort of notification that you've now connected to the Android device. From here, you just want to open up the folder, and then you can see the internal shared storage. You're going to have something like 50 gigs altogether to work with. Now you want to move over the AOSP 9.0 file, as well as that Open Gaps file that we just downloaded. And that's it. That's the only thing you need to do. So you can unplug the device from the computer and then power down your RG552. Next, hold down the function button and then turn the device on. Same thing here. As soon as you hear the fan, you can let go to both buttons. This will take you into the Team Win Recovery Project, or TWRP. On the first page here, just go ahead and slide over to the right to get to the main page. Here, you want to choose Install, and then navigate to where those two files are. If you put them in the root folder, they should be right there. So just select the AOSP one first, and then select Add More Zips. Then choose the Open Gaps one. After that, you just want to slide to confirm. And this will take another maybe 5 minutes altogether, and it's going to install the Google Play Store onto your device. Once it's done, you can select Reboot System, and then it'll ask you, do you want to install the TWRP app? And it's up to you, but I selected yes. So now let's take a look at the Android interface. One of the things that might surprise you is how quickly this one boots into Android 9. In general, it usually takes about 30 seconds to boot a device into Android, but surprisingly, with this one, it takes a little bit over 18 seconds altogether. So that's super fast, one of the fastest I've ever seen for Android. And like I mentioned, this is a super clean version of Android 9. There's hardly anything in here. But there is now the Google Play Store. So what you want to do here is open up the Play Store, log into your account, and start downloading apps. Now, about a month ago, I made an Android emulation starter guide, so I recommend checking that one out if you don't know how to set up an Android device. This one basically has everything you need. It's going to tell you which apps I prefer to install, how to set up a custom launcher, and all the other things that I think you need to do in order to have an Android device behave like a gaming machine. We're going to use the ATV launcher as our home app. This is the one that came with the stock version of Android on the RG552 as well, so this might look a little bit familiar. Either way, first thing I like to do with this is I like to go into the menu here, go into launcher settings, then sections and widgets, and then remove the widgets altogether. That's just going to make it a lot easier to access all your files. Anyway, I'm not going to get into the details about how to set up the Android side thing, but later in this video, we'll talk about the performance and what you can expect when it comes to playing games on this. For now, let's jump over to the Linux side and talk about some of those options. And we'll start with AmberELEC. Like I mentioned before, this is an upgraded version of 351ELEC. And the idea behind this name is basically that their goal is to preserve your gaming experience like how a bug gets stuck in Amber. And so in addition to the RG552 build that they've been working on, the future updates will also carry over to the 351 series too. And so as soon as the official release is out, I'll make a dedicated video to that. For now, we're going to do the pre-release of the 552 build. You're going to go into the download section, then over to the pre-release section, and then you can see right here there's a link to the pre-releases page. What you want to do here is find the latest release, go into Assets, and then find the RG552 pre-release image file. By the way, you can do this for the 351 devices too if you want to try it out. So go ahead and download that file. It's going to be about a gig altogether. And then we're going to do the same thing with JELOS. Again, I'm going to have links to all this in the written guide, which you'll find in the video description. Either way, here you're going to be able to read a little bit about the operating system itself and see whether or not it's something you want to try out. Regardless, if you go over to the installation section at the bottom here, there's going to be Assets. And the same thing here, you're going to find the RG552 version. And as you can see here, the 351 series is also supported. And I do want to mention there is one other Linux-based operating system that you may want to consider, and that's going to be Batocera. As you can see here, they do have a beta release for the RG552. But the thing about Batocera is they do a very good job optimizing their operating system for PCs, but for some of these lower spec handhelds, the experience is not quite as good as it is on the PC. They just don't have the time and resources to do the optimizations like you'll find in AmberELEC or something like JELOS. And so for that reason, I really like using Batocera on the PC, but it's not my firmware of choice for all the other handhelds. Okay, let's flash one of these to an SD card. We're actually going to start with JELOS. You can use many different apps to do this, but I'm going to use Balena Etcher because that means I don't have to unzip these files. So I'm going to select Flash from File, and then I'm going to pick JELOS here, and then choose Select Target, and I've already put in a 16GB micro SD card, so I'm going to choose that, and then select Flash. It's going to ask, do you really want to do it? And you know what to do. After that, it's going to run through the decompressing, flashing, and validation phases, and this will take about 5 minutes altogether. I'm just going to speed it up for us. Once it's done, it actually already ejects the SD card, so you can just pull it right out. Now we're going to put it into the device and then boot it up that first time. What this is going to do is expand that SD card partition to take up the entirety of the card. And again, this will take maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute, and there's not really anything else you can do at this point, so we're just going to press start to get into the main menu, and then select quit and shut down system. And now we want to load up that second SD card with all of our games. First thing we want to do is add the file system. So I'm going to use an 128 gig SD card here. This can be formatted to FAT32, exFAT, or ext4 if you're a Linux user. Either way, just make sure the card is blank and been formatted to one of those 3 file systems. Personally, I'm going to use exFAT, which is what a micro SD card comes with anyway. And all you have to do is just pop it into the SD card 2 slot and then boot up the operating system. Now, there's still not anything we can do at this point because we don't have any games on here. So same thing here, we're going to quit and then shut down system. And of course, you could transfer files over the internet, but I'm just going to do it directly onto my PC. So when I put the SD card in, you can see here, it's put all the file system in here already. And of course, you want to grab all of your BIOS files. You can grab these from the RG351 if you have one of those, or the original card that came with the RG552. You can also grab them on the internet if you look for a RetroArch BIOS pack. Now, when it comes to actually adding the games, there's an entire table available on the JELOS website. And this will show you the name of the system, the emulator it uses, the folder that you put the files in, and then what file extensions you want to use as well. And finally, there's also a listing of all the BIOS files that are either optional or necessary for each of these systems. And so if you want to put in the BIOS files one by one, this will be a nice option for you as well. Either way, it's super simple to add your games. Just make sure you have a game library, find the appropriate folder for that system, and then make sure your file type matches the one that's in this table. And of course, if you have questions about the BIOS files, you can look them up here, or I recommend just throwing in a whole pack into that BIOS folder and then not worrying about it later. Either way, that's how the process works, and obviously I can't share any game files because that's all copyrighted. But if you're watching an emulation video like this, you're probably somewhat familiar with the process already. Anyway, once you've added your games, go ahead and eject the SD card here, and let's actually put it into the device and see how it works. Okay, and so this is what it looks like once you have all the games loaded. Like with the other Linux-based systems, all the emulators are already installed. You just need to add the games and it'll take care of the rest for you. Now, like I mentioned, JELOS is a very lean operating system. For example, there are no other themes available, just this one here. But the theme they did choose is quite a diverse theme. You can go and change certain things like your background art style so that you can have different images showing up. And so we use the full screen version here for the rest of the video. And I think this has a nice clean look. You can browse through the systems, then pick a game, and then just start it all up. This has some of the similar features you find in 351ELEC, like an autosave system and auto load system. And much of the configurations have already been made for you in the backend. And so, like I mentioned in my preliminary review of the RG552, the retro gaming experience on this device is some of the best I've ever seen in my life. Playing Game Boy Advance on this with integer scaling just looks amazing. It's a 7x integer scale here. And even things like Game Boy and Game Boy Color, they look incredible as well. And finally, your 4x3 systems, things like NES and Super Nintendo, these also look incredible too. This is with integer scaling, but you can barely even see the black bars at the top and the bottom here. It's basically the perfect screen for this style of gaming. By the way, this is a 5x integer scale for Nintendo and Super Nintendo. Now, to be honest, the retro gaming experience on the stock firmware wasn't half bad either. In fact, this is very similar to that stock experience anyway. But one of the nice things here is all of the hotkeys and the screen configuration has already been done for you. And probably one of the more exciting things that's available for JELOS as well as AmberELEC is the ability to use Portmaster. Now, I've done a dedicated video on Portmaster, but this is basically a service that will allow you to install ports directly onto these devices. And primarily this was initially focused on the RG351 devices, but nearly all of them have been ported to the RG552 as well. And playing these ports on this big, beautiful screen is just a sight to behold. Previous to this device, I used to think that the best way to play Shovel Knight was on the PS Vita, but now I actually think this is better thanks to the retro-style controls. So if you love Shovel Knight, this is the perfect device to use it on. And thanks to the high-resolution screen, you can get some really nice graphical fidelity in games like Stardew Valley. So overall, I think when it comes to ports, this is some of the best options I've ever seen. So I recommend checking out the Portmaster website to see the titles available and whether or not that's something you want to invest in. And I'll leave that linked in the video description as well. Now, when it comes to higher-end emulation, you do have some options. For example, if you go into the Per System Advanced configuration, you can set a fan profile as well as an overclock specific to an entire system, or even just to one game. When you do set these overclock options, it is going to give you a warning, but in general, I've played it at the highest setting and haven't found any issues. But the sad truth is these Linux firmwares do not do very well when it comes to the high-end emulation. I just don't think the optimizations for this chipset and with these emulators is quite there. And so, for example, playing something like Cruisin' USA on the Nintendo 64, you're going to be lucky to get 40 frames per second, so that's a 2/3 gameplay speed. And to me, I would consider this to be unplayable. And unfortunately, same thing with the Sony PSP. Here I'm using a 2x resolution and with no frame skip on, and as you can see here, I'm getting about 45, maybe 50 frames per second. Again, I wouldn't consider this to be playable. In fact, the only way to get God of War even working at all is to turn the max frames per second down to 30, turn it on to an auto frame skip of 1, and then also set a resolution of 1x as well. And the end result is a game that looks super muddy and washed out, and also the frame skipping just kind of wreaks havoc on the smoothness of the experience. Again, PSP is not quite playable on the Linux side. Now, Dreamcast is another story. On JELOS, there's a little bit more hits than miss here, but all the same, it's not a super smooth experience. Again, with Marvel vs. Capcom 2, I'm not even getting 45 frames per second. Now, it's not all doom and gloom on the Linux side. For example, Sega Saturn is actually pretty good on here. And that's because both JELOS and AmberELEC take advantage of the standalone Yabasan Shiro core that was released via AmberELEC and ArcOS earlier this year. And so this is going to take advantage of auto frame skipping, and the gameplay on many games is pretty dang smooth. I would say the Sega Saturn performance on JELOS is better than it is with Nintendo 64, PSP, or Dreamcast. But of course, it's not quite perfect, but all the same, if you do have a hankering for Sega Saturn games and you want to play them on Linux, this is going to be an option. Okay, let's move over to AmberELEC. Now, some of the footage that I made here is before they rebranded, so you're going to see some 351ELEC in here as well. But for the most part, the process is going to be the same. And so instead of flashing JELOS this time, we're going to do 351ELEC, but it's the exact same process. Pick the firmware, pick the SD card, and then say, yeah, man, I want to do it. After it's been flashed, you need to do the exact same thing. You're going to turn it on one time to resize the partition, and then you'd want to add an exFAT partitioned SD card, and it's going to make the same file system and everything else. And so here is the browsing experience of 351ELEC, and you might think, hey, this is actually a very similar experience, and it is. But there are a lot of things under the hood that are available on 351ELEC that are not on the lean operating system of JELOS. For example, if you go into the updates section, you can find a themes downloader. And right now there are only 3 themes available for the RG552, but one of my favorites, which is ElecFull NX, is available here. And so I'm going to install the theme here, and as you can see, it looks great. And so the setup is the exact same here. You're going to navigate through your systems, pick your game, and then you can load a save state if you want, and then just jump right into your game. And these also have been pre-configured with special hotkeys and visual settings, and all that other great stuff we've come to expect from 351ELEC. Oh, and one thing I forgot to mention earlier, both JELOS and AmberELEC now have the ability to use sleep. This was something not available on the stock firmware. All you have to do is tap the power button to go to sleep, and then tap it again to wake up. Now, the battery life on sleep is not very good. For example, one day I left it at 77%, and then the next day it was down to 17%, so it doesn't hold a charge very well at all. Now, I'm going to do a dedicated video on AmberELEC when the final release is available, but I do want to show off one feature which is pretty exciting to me, and that is that they've implemented a new version of Flycast on RetroArch that includes an auto frame skip, and this is going to be turned on by default when you start up your games. And what this will do is when the device is having a hard time keeping up with the frame rate, it'll auto frame skip for you to give you a relatively more smooth experience and maintain a full gameplay speed. And so for example, as you can see with Marvel vs. Capcom 2, it's playing at a much faster speed. Now to me, I can definitely feel that there's some frame skip going on, but if you want to play a Dreamcast game at full speed on the Linux side, this is going to be your best bet right now. And again, like I mentioned, I'll go into a lot of the other neat features that are coming up with this new version of AmberELEC in a later video. And of course, one of the greatest strengths of AmberELEC is the comprehensive documentation that they have on their website, which has now been changed to AmberELEC.org. Within here, you can see everything that you need to know about transferring your BIOS, getting everything set up that very first time around, how to navigate the menus or where to add your games, all that other stuff is all available within the website. In fact, they even have a Portmaster guide which will show you which games work best. And so if you have any questions, then I would recommend going to AmberELEC.org and going through the documentation. Or you could go to their Discord server. Both JELOS and AmberELEC have their own Discord servers. And again, I'll leave all this stuff in the written guide in the video description. And again, I'll leave all this stuff in the written guide too. Now, one thing that's always important to the end user is how fast are the boot up and startup times. So let's do a test real quick. We're going to do the boot up time first. And just for reference here, the stock operating system actually had a very fast boot up time on Linux. It was something like maybe 15-16 seconds. But honestly, anything below 30 seconds to me is pretty dang good. And right now, the boot up times are a little bit different for each of these. For example, with JELOS right now, it's a little under 18 seconds. And AmberELEC is something around 24-25 seconds. Now, these boot up times are probably going to fluctuate over time, especially because both of these operating systems are open source, so they're going to use each other's findings and kind of improve everything for everyone. Now let's do these startup times when we actually load up a game. And just using the default experience here, you can see that JELOS is a little under 5 seconds, where AmberELEC is a little bit over 6. And honestly, both of those boot times are super fast and nice. And you can actually speed up AmberELEC if you go into the UI settings, and then under Game Launch Transition, set that to Instant. This isn't on by default, but when you set it to this, it is going to improve your game load time. So let's try it again here, and as you can see, it's a little bit under 5 seconds. So the game load time is actually exceptionally good for both of these operating systems. And so my recommendation on the Linux side is just to try each of these ones out and see which one you like best. And the nice thing is that the second SD card actually is mostly compatible with either of these. For example, this entire video was done with just one single SD2 card that I set up on JELOS. It worked just fine with AmberELEC too. Now, I think over time there's probably going to be less parity between the two, so this isn't something you'd want to do permanently. But if you just want to test the two, I would say you probably don't need to make a second SD card altogether. Okay, now let's move on to the Android operating system, and let me show you some of the cool features and tweaks that are available in here. I've already talked a little bit about the overall experience, putting in ATV Launcher here, and then using my Android guide to set up all of your emulators too. Personally, I like to use the Launchbox front end, as you can see here, and I've mostly focused on the high-end systems only. And that's because I enjoy using the Linux-based operating system for the low-end stuff. So for this one, we're going to focus on the high-end stuff only. Now, like I mentioned, the Android version has support for both 5 GHz Wi-Fi as well as Bluetooth, which both were not available on the internal chip of the 552. But thanks to some software wizardry and this little dongle here, you can now get both of them in one USB chip. And so let's plug it in and see how this works. We're going to go into the settings here, go into Bluetooth, and then I'm going to pair it with a Bluetooth controller. And just like that, it connected no problem. In fact, the input delay is really nice on this too. And the fact that the 552 has an HDMI out function means that you can use this thing as a mini console. You hook up your Bluetooth controller, hook this up to a TV, and you're off to the races. And so that really increases the opportunities on this device, especially on the Android side with this Bluetooth. And I'm happy to report that Bluetooth audio works really well too. So I'm going to go ahead and pair my AirPods to it here. And we're going to go to the BitShifter website so we can listen to the original intro music I used to have on this channel. And so we can get a little bit of nostalgia here while listening to this old song using some Bluetooth headphones. Now, it is possible to also install this chip internally, and this is what it'll look like when it's all set up. Unfortunately, I'm not quite capable of doing soldering just yet, but this is a project I hope to tackle sometime in the future. But for now, I think the USB dongle is working just great. Okay, another feature available on here is a key mapping software. What you want to do is press the function button while a game is loaded, and it'll come up with the on-screen menu here. And all you want to do is move the buttons to the appropriate spot, and then up here on the top left, press the Save/Hide button. After that, the buttons are going to be matched to these touchscreen controls. And this is going to allow you to play games that you normally wouldn't be able to play with the controller. And so of course that's a great little option here too. And finally, like I mentioned before, it's really easy to change some of the profiles. What you do is swipe down from the top, and then up here you can see the different overclocking profiles. You just basically tap through to find the one you prefer. I'm going to do the max overclocking, and then also you have a fan profile right next to it. I'm going to set this to a high fan profile too. And there are also two different sleep modes. There's a safe and a fast one. Personally, I leave it on the default one, which is safe. And then you can change the button layout between Xbox and Nintendo. And so that way, when you navigate through the menus and the games, A, B, and XY will be however you prefer. There's also an ability to lock the screen in landscape mode, and you can also assign buttons to the back button. But luckily, they've moved all the menu buttons to the right side of the screen, and they're super easy to access. So now let's jump into the gameplay perspective and show you some of the things that I've found. Number one, we'll start with Nintendo 64. We're going to use Mupen FC Plus emulator, and this one works incredibly well. I would say that the majority of the games are going to play in 720p resolution, which looks really nice on this screen. And so I'm very comfortable in saying that with this upgraded version of Android, this is a very capable Nintendo 64 device. I would say that 90% of games are going to play at 720p resolution with zero slowdown altogether. Some of those higher end games, you know, things like Cruisin' USA or GoldenEye, you'll need to drop those down to 480p, but they are still completely playable. And honestly, 480p still looks pretty dang good on this screen too. I would also recommend using Android for the Drastic emulator for Nintendo DS, and that's because this one can take advantage of the touchscreen controls available on the Android side. And again, here I can double the resolution and everything looks great too, so I would say this is more than capable for Nintendo DS as well. For Sega Saturn, I'm going to use Yaba-Sanshiro 2, which is an app in the Play Store, and this one also runs really well. I'm using the original Saturn resolution with an auto frame skip, and everything feels nice and smooth. So this also is a capable Sega Saturn machine too. And I would say that Dreamcast here on Android is better than on Linux too. This is using the Redream emulator, and it also has an auto frame skip on, but as you can see, it's staying at a fairly constant 60 frames per second. There will be some games that'll dip down a little bit, but thanks to that auto frame skip, the gameplay itself will feel relatively smooth too. And so while not every single game is going to play at full speed, as you can see here, Sega Rally Championship 2 is not quite getting 60 frames per second. I would still say that the majority of games on here on Dreamcast are going to run well. And this is at a 480p resolution, but some games you may be able to jump up to 720p as well. So next, let's talk about Sony PSP. Now, the performance on this is kind of mixed. You do need to do some configurations to make it work well, but I would say maybe 50% of games you can play at a 2x resolution with no frame skip on, and they're going to run just fine. Virtua Tennis World Tour works just fine, same thing with Tekken 6. And some games actually surprised me. Things like X-Men Legends 2 played at full speed at 2x resolution with no frame skip. This is a game I didn't think was going to play this well at those settings. Now, other games are not going to run at full speed at 2x resolution. Let's just be upfront about that now. For example, Ridge Racer, one of my favorite racing games, does not run very well at 2x. But if you jump into the settings and change it to a 1x resolution, it actually plays at full speed. Unfortunately, the graphics are a little bit muddy at this point, but all the same, it still plays really well. In fact, the experience at a 1x resolution is very much like how it is when you try to play a PSP game on the PS Vita. There are some games you're able to upscale using a special plugin, but for the most part, everything's going to play at a 1x resolution like this too. And of course, it's a different experience than playing it at 2x, but all the same, it runs well. But of course, let's push things to the limit and see what we can do. For example, let's do God of War Chains of Olympus. For this one, we need to use a 1x resolution and then also turn on a frame skip of 1. Now, this is going to be a smoother gameplay experience than it is on Linux, but it's still something that I wouldn't find completely enjoyable. And even with a frame skip of 1, I do get some dips in quality as well. So overall, I would just say that God of War is not something I would choose to play on the RG552. And it's a similar experience for other hard-to-emulate games like Outrun 2006. This one I have to do with a 1x resolution with a frame skip of 1. And you know, if you're desperate to play this game, this might be acceptable, but for me personally, I would much rather play this on something like the Odin Pro, which can do a 3x resolution with no frame skip at all and still play relatively smoothly. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about GameCube emulation. Let me just preface all this by saying don't get your hopes up. I'm going to use Dolphin MMJR, which I think is the most performant version of Dolphin available on Android. But as you can see here, even games that are pretty easy to run like Sonic Heroes are not playing very well at all. Now we can do some tweaks. For example, if we go in here and adjust the emulated clock speed to something like 70%, it is going to improve the audio quality significantly. But all the same, you still are going to get some pretty slow gameplay here too. Now if you're really desperate for some GameCube gameplay and you don't have any of those high-end systems or an Android phone or anything else like that, then it is possible to get some somewhat decent gameplay with certain games if you tweak it enough. For example, with Crash Nitro Kart, when I set the emulation speed to 300%, it actually ran pretty well. Same thing with Alien Hominid. This one actually played at just about 100% right out of the box. So there are going to be some games that are playable on this device with GameCube, but they will be few and far between. There are some other tricks you could do. For example, if you used a PAL ROM, which is going to run at 50 Hz, you might be able to get some better gameplay. But I wouldn't expect the world. For example, here with Mario Kart Double Dash, as much as I tried, I could not get this to run at a playable speed. Same thing with others like NBA Street. If I was a betting man, I would say you could probably play maybe 5 to 10% of GameCube games, and maybe closer to 10% if you're going to use the PAL ROMs, but still not very good odds. And even though I was excited with the fact that this runs Android 9, which means that you can use the Ether SX2 emulator, unfortunately the gameplay on this is even worse than it is on GameCube. Even if I set it to the fast and unsafe preset, and then adjust all the clock speed profiles to as low as they can go, I really didn't find a single PS2 game that was playable at all. And so despite the fact that there are some really neat innovations with this version of Android, I would say that right now PS2 is not within the realm of possible on this device. And so wrapping up all the performance that we just figured out, this is kind of where I stacked everything in the end. When it comes to the retro systems, all three of these firmwares work really well. Personally, I think that AmberELEC and JELOS are better, and that's because there's a lot of configuration required on the Android side in order to get these working correctly. With the Linux-based operating systems, that configuration has already been done for you. Now on top of that, you can navigate all the menus by just using the controller, unlike on Android where you have to use a mix of the controller and a touchscreen. I gave MAME a slightly lesser score on Android, and that's because of the inherent hiccups that come with trying to run MAME on Android. For the most part, you don't have a wide range of ROM sets that are going to be compatible, both with RetroArch and MAME for Droid. And so I think just out of the box, the AmberELEC and JELOS versions are going to work better if you're really going to be wanting to play arcade games. Now, after that, across the board, everything else works better on Android than it does on the other systems. Sega Saturn works really well, Nintendo 64 does as well, same thing with Nintendo DS. Dreamcast does have some slight performance issues, as well as PSP. And then, of course, like I showed you, GameCube is mostly bad, and PS2 isn't even worth it in the first place. Now, I did give Dreamcast and AmberELEC a little bit better of a score than JELOS, because it does have that auto frame skip option, which I'm sure is going to get ported over to JELOS in some time in the future too. But for now, I would say the performance between those two are just about equal. Of course, Android's going to play Android games, and Portmaster is available for AmberELEC and JELOS too. And so yeah, in summary, this is about the performance that you can expect across the board. I would say this is miles better than the firmware experience that was just 3 months ago. And it's a testament to the hard work and innovations that all three of these teams put together. Now, does this change my opinion of this device? And honestly, maybe a little bit. At the end of the day, I still think this is a device that can play retro games better than just about anything else out there. A lot of that has to do with the really nice controls and this super good screen. But the device still has poor ergonomics when it comes to these shoulders and triggers. And for that reason, I actually still don't enjoy streaming on this device, because most of the games you would stream are going to require shoulders and triggers, especially in combination with those analog sticks at the bottom. And the amount of stretching you have to do to get a comfortable grip, I think is just not worth it. And so I think if you wanted the RG552 to be that one all-in-one device, it's still not there. And unfortunately, that has nothing to do with the great innovations when it comes to the firmware. The ergonomics, to me, just kind of hold it back. The other thing about this device is it still hasn't dropped in price. It's still being sold for $227. I think if that price dropped to $199, it would be a much more viable deal. And if Anbernic was somehow able to sell it for $175, I would say it was definitely worth it at that price point. But at $227, especially when compared to something like the Odin or Odin Pro, the value is just not there. But if you're somebody who really just wants to focus on PS1 and below gameplay, the experience that you can get with this device is better than others out there on the market. And so if you just want to have that ultimate Game Boy Advance or ultimate Super Nintendo, this is going to be a great device for those options. And I gotta say, Nintendo 64 is really great on this now too. But whether or not that experience is worth $227, that's really going to be up to you. And of course, Anbernic is always going to be making new devices too. In fact, there are 2 others on the horizon that we'll probably see in the next few months. So I would say, if you already own an RG552, absolutely, you're going to want to upgrade to these 3 custom firmware options. But if you're still in the market for that one perfect handheld, then I'm not really sure the RG552 is going to be the one for you. At this point, the only real advantage that this device has over something like the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus or the Odin Lite Base or Pro is the fact that you can get this on AliExpress and then you'll have it in your hands in about 2 weeks, or you can pay a little bit extra and have it from Amazon in just a matter of days. And so in that sense, it may be worth it to you just to be able to have something to play while you wait for something else in the future. But it seems with every passing day, we're going to have more and more options available, which may make the RG552 less and less relevant as time goes on. Anyway, that's about it for this video. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do these new firmware options make this device a more compelling buy? And like I mentioned before, be sure to check out the written guide I have in the video description. It's going to have links to all this stuff if you want to get it set up yourself. As always, thank you for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.